Hello, everybody. This is Pete Morris. This is the Comanche Zone for March the 4th. And Ray Burton is going to be talking about running your tank dry. This is the show that we're doing tonight. I hope I can get it here. There we go. So you can see what's going on. This is not really a technique that you want to use all the time or count on, but it's a good thing to have in your back pocket. Like down here, I said in my joking way, there are two types of pilots, those who've had gear ups and those who are yet to have them. Same thing with running a tank dry by mistake. Those are those that have done it and those that will be doing it. So with that, we're going to start the Zoom. We're back to our normal who you are, where you are, and what you fly. And you're going to have to unmute yourself if you want to talk.
Just to be clear, everybody, I called an enforcement guy at the FAA to clear this topic, and he said, absolutely running tank dries. It's about, do you have your fuel reserves? So he said, it'll make y'all a lot safer. And he happens to be a Comanche pilot as well.
Hi, this is Larry out in San Diego. CJ, I don't know if it was my end or your end, but I got blocked. What did you say the FAA said?
Yeah, CJ, you're kind of intermittent. Garbled.
It's not what the guy said.
You're really garbled, CJ. From the sounds of what CJ was saying, having talked to the FAA, they're saying this will make us safer. That sounds like it might be approved for a wings credit, but we'll see what happens.
I was wondering if they had any comments on running your tanks dry. That's my question.
Yeah. I think CJ has gone to the other side of the mountain. So the rest of you,
you mean as far as what their thoughts are on on proposing it, like for this session?
Hey, Ray. How's it going?
Going pretty good. Sorry, I'm trying to figure out how to get this to show me who's speaking.
Oh, yeah, you can change between speaker view and chat.
There you are. Gotcha now. So my understanding is the FAA felt that it was a conversation worth having, and that if the feedback I got was that they would prefer the first time that it ever happened to you, it be at altitude when you were planning on it, and that not at 300 foot on final and you don't know what happened. So that was why they felt it was a discussion worth having, is my understanding of the FAA's reaction to the subject of this presentation.
Well, when CJ gets to this side of the mountain, we'll see what she did find out. Go ahead if you want to. You key your mic and say who you are, where you are, and what you fly.
It's Ernie James, Southern California, Yucca Valley, PA 24260. The first time I ran my tank dry was on base in the pattern.
Rodney Cubic, can you hear my audio?
Yep.
Yes, sir.
We got you, Rodney.
I have a 1961 Piper Comanche 180, and I have a 1947 Luscombe that I fly, and I fly out of Des Moines. And I'm working on my Comanche right now and need to do that airworthy directive on the tail, and I want to put shoulder harnesses in it. Having been a problem with the alternator, I'm going to go like 60 miles and then I'll lose my alternator. That's not very good because you got to drop your gear and stuff. So I really enjoy this group. That CJ, you guys are doing just a great job, and I wanted you to know how much I do enjoy everything and appreciate everything you guys do.
She did?
Oh my goodness, Rodney, welcome, and thank you for being here, and thank you for saying that. It's a big team.
You do a great job. You're just an excellent host, and you're just so kind. I just enjoy listening to you because you're not mean to anyone. You're just a lot of fun.
You've never seen her around me, have you?
Thanks, Ray. You just keep it up, both of you.
I'm just saying I deserve it.
Right. Glad to have you all in. Am I still garbled?
You're better.
Okay. What I was going to say is I just wanted y'all to know that just to check, I called an enforcement or former enforcement guy who happens to fly a restoration that he did, and said, hey, this is our topic. What do you think? And he sort of thought about it for a moment, and he said, it's a tool, as Ray put it. And he said, the requirements on it, sure you're how to manage fuel is just the pilot. So we discussed the fact that pilots don't think as well when they are surprised, and that knowing, keeping things so that you really have fuel in the tank you're planning to land on, that last tank is a very good planning tool. And we kind of discussed it and decided that it's a really good thing to have these kinds of discussions because it helps us manage our fuel better and more consciously. So we, I don't know if I'd call it a blessing because I don't want to put anybody in that situation, but it has been discussed, and we feel it's an improvement to safety. So thank you all for coming, and Ray, thank you for giving this topic.
Oh, you're in a very effective arm twister, CJ, so.
Hey, as long as you don't tell anybody I was like threatening that we were going to take off with your family, we're all good, right?
What, you want them?
You're evil. Welcome all. When you have a chance, jump in any quiet spot and say who you are, where you are, and what you fly.
Hey, this is Rodney. Excuse me. One of the things I wanted to mention, we're talking about that fuel, is I have those Osborne tip tanks on my Comanche and stuff. And what happened to me one time was I'm not able to move my selector, just flying cross country, and it just froze up. And it's kind of enlightening to have all that fuel in the airplane, but you can't get to it with your fuel selector. So it's not always mismanagement of your fuel. You can have a malfunction sometime and put you into a difficult situation. I just wanted to throw that
Rodney,
out there. Go ahead.
I think it was actually the last command.
CJ, you're underwater again.
I'll put the chat room.
I think if the audio continues like that, we're going to have to rename you to R2CJ2.
SEAJ.
It sounds more like R2D2 with the beeps and bloops.
Dave's bandwidth and will improve the audio quality.
Rodney, do you have the dual selector valves with the tip tanks or just the one valve?
I have dual valves, but I can port either from the tip or from the mains, right or left, and that they came stock. Oh, it's an add-on with the Osborne stuff.
Yep.
But like I'm saying, is that valve and it freezes up. You can't get that fuel. Got all that fuel in the airplane, and all of a sudden you can't get it. It's really enlightening.
Yeah, I've got
have
or something.
So I have the same thing, but I have a main and aux, and then a flip switch, a toggle switch with a solenoid that allows the tip tanks to be used. And I always burn those first to make sure I get that fuel after I take off.
No, correct me if I'm wrong in that. And you're in a single?
Twin.
Okay. correct me if I'm wrong, in the twin, there's a zero fuel weight with the tips, right? A certain amount of that gross weight increase is fuel only.
That's correct.
Tips?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. All right.
Okay.
But you don't want to land with it anyway, but I don't know what the other dumbest configuration is, but I figure that's the least reliable because it goes to a selector and a solenoid. So if I use that early in the trip, then when I'm getting, things are getting tight later on, I know whether I'm going to have it or not. So I run dry and I'm ready. And the engine starts to sputter and I flip over.
Yeah, totally agree with that.
I would like to make a comment too. Okay, on my Luscombe, I noticed that I had a fuel line from the sediment bulb to the carburetor. It was weeping. And when I removed that, I found that my shutoff valve was leaking. And this might seem kind of ridiculous to you, but actually I disassembled that fuel shutoff valve and cleaned it up. And what I did was I seeded it by putting an abrasive in their toothpaste and working it back and forth, and it's been holding ever since. So there is some repair that you can do on those fuel valves. You know, when we get in these old airplanes, you know, we got to take care of them ourselves. So that worked for me. It was surprising enough. But if you go to like a Comet or something like that, it's a little bit too harsh on that brass seating. You know, so that's why I just used a toothpaste to seat it, for whatever that's worth.
You ever use Brasso?
No, I'm just saying is I reseated it with using toothpaste and just kept working it till it seated itself, and it's been holding great for 2 years now. So yeah. I won't recommend any of that. I'm just telling you about my experience and what I did for repair. Yeah. Because where are you going to find those old parts?
Yeah, toothpaste is a very fine abrasive.
That is correct.
I have.
Of course, I Scotch-Brighted. I Scotch-Brighted it first, you know, to get it a little bit more under control. But there was like crap in there, and I don't know where that came from. It just maybe old dirt or something that is in the air or something. You know, after those many years. But after I cleaned that all out and I Scotch-Brighted it, and then I reseated it by lapping it with toothpaste back and forth, and it sealed up great.
I have had a problem with I have the same setup as tip tanks in a 1959 250. But the Osborne system, those seem to get harder and harder. So about every 2 to 3 years at annual time, they need some fuel.
That's fine.
For a while.
There is
I think we can all say hi to
fuel lube and fuel seal. There's a difference between those two. Go ahead. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, that's all right. I said everything I wanted to say.
I was just saying hi to Malcolm's son.
Hi, all. It's CJ
Hey there
again.
He wanted to say hi to CJ, but then he got shy and ran out of the room. Quinn, come back for a sec.
Oh my goodness. Hey, Quinn.
Hello.
I think it's the first time they saw the Comanche Zoom a couple weeks ago when Will Carpenter was on.
Oh, awesome. That's one of your dad's students.
Yeah. He told me. Like,
I hope you'll watch this. Yeah. Quinn, you should watch this because when you're flying, it's a great technique to know how to do it. And
yeah, we'll have to
teaching somebody about your age. So you'll have to meet Sawyer one of these days. Good to see you.
You too.
Thanks for being here. Yeah,
Hey all, I just wanted to say hi. I've never done this Zoom thing. I'm Coffee, and I fly a 66-260B. And I don't know if this is like a, I don't know how this works. The Comanche Zoom thing, I've always been unavailable. But I'm on location right now in Dominican Republic. But, you know, I had one issue where I ran a tank dry. Unbeknownst to me, I was sumping fuel out the bottom of the airplane the entire flight because an O-ring popped when I was sumping fuel pre-flight. And I didn't know it until I landed, and, you know, it was uneventful. It scared me, but, you know, I changed tanks and landed and didn't know what went wrong. And it wasn't until I got out of the plane and looked under the plane and fuel's dumping out. But, you know, I'm curious if there's a proper way, or if Ray, if that's the point of this, is to have a proper way to run tanks dry, just so that it doesn't, scare the crap out of anybody, but also, you know, damage any of the internal mechanisms or functionality of the engine.
That'll be addressed, and that's kind of those concerns are what the reason for discussing it. So we're going to talk about what actually happens, what's going on, how to get it, what sequence to use, and then so there's two elements to this. One is getting used to it happening for fuel management and purposely going to the very last drop you can get, why it's a good idea when it's not a good idea. And then the advanced stage of that, of once you've gotten used to it, of here are the trigger signs you're going to see. Here's what happens right before it dies. And so you can actually avoid that sudden quiet, the deceleration, and the heart leaping out of your chest, and your wife smacking the crap out of you because you scared her to absolute death.
Yeah, and
we're going to try to touch on
I've flown with a couple other, you know, Comanche pilots since that happened, and I've purposely ran the tank dry. I just don't, I don't feel like I get the rise in fuel flow right before the engine starts sputtering and quits. You know, I'm obviously on a timer and watching everything pretty closely once I realize, or I know time-wise, that I'm down to the final gallon, let's say. But, you know, I'm waiting, and I'm sure you'll go through it, but I'm waiting to see a rise in my fuel flow. But the only indication I get is sputter, 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 sputter. And then, you know, if I'm not on the boost or a boost pump, and
you're flying a fuel injected at 260, am I correct?
Yeah, correct.
Okay. So I can't speak to the fuel injected models, which unfortunately is most of them. What I can tell you on the carbureted is the fuel pressure comes down. I never had, when I started doing this, I never had fuel flow. So when I have, you know, until recently, I just put an engine monitor in. Now I have all that. It's great. I love it. I was having to go with the really terrible fuel gauges we have and not knowing what my fuel burn actually was at 9, 10, 11, 12,000 feet, and trying to, mostly for me, it was never about how far can I go before I stop. It was, how much do I actually have on board and where is it? But what I find is the fuel pressure needle will start dropping. And once it gets to 0, I have about 5 to 10 seconds before the engine quits. And, you know, CJ and Hank flew with me from Oshkosh a couple of years ago on a cross country midweek. And you can ask CJ, we'd be flying along and I'd look at her and go, the engine's going to quit in 3, 2, 1, woof. Now, it's a really neat parlor trick, but the real purpose of it is if you know your airplane that well and you find yourself in a spot where you need max endurance, it's nice to know that I have used every drop in that tank. That tank's truly out of play. And that was what, maybe 5 minutes more that you didn't run on a main.
Yeah. And I want to just chime in, Ray, since you brought it up, that we were flying. And although Ray and I had discussed it, and although he told me exactly what was going to happen, and although I have been flying Comanches with my father since first happened, I went to the final, even though it was happened. And that was part of the incentive for wanting us all to have the opportunity to come through this, because I calmed down a lot more faster and was able to focus and learn, versus the one time after that it happened and it was a surprise and it was at night. And even though I still knew what had happened and was able to calm down more quickly, the knowledge, the adrenaline release and then decline let me think much more clearly. So I just want to thank Ray.
You're
still underwater.
CJ.
Yeah.
Hey, Alan.
Hey.
I'm going to try killing my video.
Okay.
There you go. That's much better. Hey, CJ, I got an update on the STEC 3100 if you're up for it.
Yes, please, Mike. I know a lot of people with the STEC are interested.
I got a call this morning from my avionics shop. He just gotten off the phone with STEC, with Genesis, and they are ready to ship 250s and 260s. 400s are already shipping, but they're ready to ship 250s, 260s, 260B, 260C. So we're off. As of today, we're off.
Okay, so is it today the 1 year extra warranty is no longer available, or can people still get their orders in today?
I don't know that. I did not ask that question. Of course, my order was in 1 year and 4 months ago. I didn't ask that.
I'll send a quick text over to Genesis. The only other piece of information for the folks who are dealing with STEC and Genesis is that although they've been acquired by Moog, they're being left to run as an independent group, so you should still get the same great support and the same great service from STEC as you've been getting. Just a quick autopilot update. I'm literally driving out from the STC group's hangar. And so a quick update on Garmin. I don't know if any of you saw it, but there was the first test flight in Owen Catherwood's 260B just happened a few days ago, and it looks really good. And then the STEC, the prelim plan is in, and the machined parts which should be the final installation are those drawings are being completed and on their way. And as soon as that test installation is confirmed, so we can confirm the installation instructions, it's over to the FAA, and then everybody just waits. So all 3 autopilot projects are moving forward. This is massive for the Comanche. We've gone from having nothing to having 3 modern autopilots, 2 from really, really long track record, well-known firms, plus 1 that's got almost 4,000 experimentals installed with no issues. It changes the value of the airplane enormously. So thank you to everybody that's helped make all these projects possible, and yay for us. And everybody just jump in and say who you are, where you are, and what you fly.
Hi, everybody. I'm Adam Height. I have a Comanche 400 in Colorado and soon to be a Comanche 400 in South Dakota. I'm really happy to announce that I will actually be in America at the end of the month and flying properly. I've finally managed to sort all the visa and everything out to allow me to travel so I can get out of, Britain.
Cool.
Adam, just remember to fly on the correct side of the Victor Airways. Welcome to America.
Will we see you at Sun and Fun in one of your 400?
You will. We're not sure if we're going to be able to take 9497 Papa. We definitely can't take 8502. She's been abandoned for 31 years. But we might be able to get 9497 if we can get our annual done in time. If not, we'll be in the Twin Comanche, which is a friend of mine, or I'll come in a full mask and hazmat suit because I'll be flying a VTOL Dr. Killer. So I don't want anyone to recognize me.
Just on the other side of the airfield. And
yeah, we'll park it as far away as possible. Well, in fact, we'll park at the airport next to Lakeland and then taxi in. That's less embarrassing.
Okay, I will admit that at the Sun and Fun holiday fly in ComancheTown did host one very, very lovely, well, it was a bonanza in disguise because it actually had a Comanche 402 sign on it with Greg Peel. So
if anyone wants to walk up with a if anyone wants to walk up with a permanent marker and write Comanche where it says Bonanza, I'm perfectly happy with that. But hopefully we'll have the 400 ready. And Mike, I'm really excited to see the upgrade on your plane with the GI 275s as well.
Yeah, my pocketbook's not too excited, but
Can't take it with you.
yeah, that's why I keep telling my wife. She doesn't want to hear it.
Okay, everybody.
Actually, it's the kids. I have, I think it was Alan. Oh.
I'm going to go ahead and share my sales pitch here while you guys are talking. So here we go. This is what we're doing. For those of you who can see the screen, if this was for Wings Credit, this is how you would do it. The swap meet is doing pretty well. As you can see in the thing ComancheTown sends out, there's a lot of stuff in there. And then the online project for data and stuff like that, oneredjeep@gmail.com, there's all kinds of stuff there. That's very much worth visiting. We're looking to raise some funds. If you want to donate for the Comanche Zooms, things like that, this is how you can do it one way, by check. Also, the ComancheTown or the Comanche Zoom invitations have a button for PayPal, and that will also get money to us. We've been putting money into a bunch of things, scientific research and all kinds of stuff. So it's really going to be worth doing something. And then these are some of the projects we're trying to set up or get going on. This was from Bill Kniff, trying to make us think about what it is to be a Comanche flyer in the Comanche world. And here we are back on the beginning, so I'll get out of that.
What is this swap meet? I've never heard of that.
It's a list of things that people want to sell or find, and it's growing. If you look at if you get the Comanche Zoom invitation from Leslie Thomas, it's in that. It's also listed on my website, so you can see it there too. While I'm doing that kind of stuff, I'm going to share that too, right here. This is the Comanche, northeastcomanche.org website. There it is up on the top. And one way I want to do right away is tell you about the fly-in schedule. We have decided not to do a fly-in in March, mostly because of the weather has been screwy and the COVID problems. So we're scratch that from the first actual fly-in is going to be in April at Delaware Coastal.
Go ahead, Pete.
But of course there is the Sun and Fun happening before that happens. Also, we have a bunch of things that you can get. Here is a cup order form that you can get. If you want to order a cup for the Northeast Comanche tribe, this is the form that you would fill out, and it comes to me. They're $10 a piece. If you're going to have it mailed to your house, it'll be around $10, maybe $9 for mailing, but you can also pick it up for free at a fly-in. No problem, no shipping. And then back here, we also have registration for Sun and Fun, right here. Everything you ever wanted to say to the people at Sun and Fun about whether you're going to come in. Your name, your aircraft, when you're going to be there, showing up on the first day or the last day, your general route if you're going to share your rides, whether or not you're camping or hoteling, and any comment you want to do. So there's a lot of things going on. One other thing that we're trying to work up with, Bill Kniff got us going on this one, is this deal, a A&P survey or resource. We want to locate as many as we can shops that deal with Comanches. So here's your chance to send in, to nominate somebody really, the name of the shop, their phone number, the airport identifier, the city and town that they're located in, and if you want to name a particular specific A&P, and then rate the shop. As you can see, you have all kinds of choices here. And then any other comments you have, like for instance, is this the shop that does your annual? Or have you had any really good success stories or bad luck there? So those are all things that we can do. They're all on the website. So going here, you can find them all. The forum links are here. The Comanche Zooms, I've been showing those already, and the flying schedule. Comanche Zooms are here. So here's what's coming up. And here is what has been recorded recently. If you go to this one, it goes to 2020 Comanche Zooms. So everything is there. As they used to have on the Carson show, everything you ever wanted to know about Comanches is on that website. So
Pete, that is a great job. Thank you so much. And it is 7:30. I'm just going to quickly introduce one of my ComancheTown co-hosts, Pat Donovan, to give a quick discussion about ComancheTown. And then as we go into that, I do want to just wish a very special person a very happy birthday. Bill Caniff has owned his Comanche since 1975. He is one of the earliest members of the old International Comanche Society. He's done a great service in keeping the Comanche spirit alive. Happy birthday to Bill Caniff. And Bill, are you in here? Or are you not in yet?
I think I saw his name.
All right. And just a quick introduction to Pat Donovan to give a quick status on ComancheTown. I might have to do it.
Okay, go for it.
All right. Well, just a quick thing. So ComancheTown at Sun and Fun is on. Sun and Fun is a huge outdoor event. The Sun and Fun Holiday Fly-In, which happened in December, was kind of a test flight to make sure we didn't have a super spreader event. And it's got good support. ComancheTown itself is on. Sun and Fun has bent over backwards to make us welcome. We've got that same primo Sparky spot as we did before. It's right in the middle of the action. It's on the flight line where you can see all the air shows, fireworks, balloon stuff, everything, and be right down in Bender Alley. The key thing about our pod is the chairman and CEO of Sun and Fun actually is a Comanche driver with the most carrier landings ever in the planet. And they had a very wet year one year, and they gave us the high ground. So, because they was like, you know what, your airplanes are closer to the ground. The reason that we wanted to bring up ComancheTown briefly is that we asked them for 35 dedicated spots, and then we can add more so we can tail people in and
we lost you.
Uh-oh. Thanks, Steve. We're already getting relatively close to capacity. So please, if you go to northeastcomanche.org and you go under the forms link, there is a registration form there to register for ComancheTown. If you plan to come and you want a spot, go and fill out that form. And that gets you a reserved spot. It'll ask you when you're coming and when you're going to use. And that
CJ, we are losing you.
That's right. The head administrator of the Piper Comanche Facebook group, myself, Tucker Rice for the millennials, will be able to help with planning and making sure we can accommodate as many Comanches as possible. If we know ahead of time we're going to just be massively over at capacity, we think Sun and Fun may be willing to work with us. So please spread the word that if you want to come, get your registration in ASAP, and that way we can make sure everybody can be accommodated as possible. Before we introduce Ray Burton. All right, well, without further ado, Ray Burton's a CFII, MEI, ATD, flying for one of the regionals, got a 250 and went through just about every single thing that you can go through. And welcome, Ray, and thanks for talking about how to run a tank.
Okay, before we go over to Ray, I'm going to suggest everybody, I'm going to mute everybody again. So if you need to talk, you're going to have to unmute. But I also suggest everybody goes to the speaker view, because that way you'll see him up close and personal. Okay, Ray, it's all yours.
All right, I'll see if I can get this working. I'm going to try to keep an eye on the chat box. So if you do have a question and we end up getting into the 50 people talking type thing, if you want to throw something in the chat box, I'm going to try to keep an eye on it to answer questions as they come up. If you do have questions, I do want to try to answer them. And we'll at least see how that goes. If all else fails, we will take questions at the end of it. What I'd like to start with is you will undoubtedly go online. If you Google the question of running a tank dry in aviation, you will get all kinds of arguments for and against it. And generally, the way it seems to sum up is, with today's technology, with fuel totalizers and everything else, that most guys don't see the need to bother running a tank dry, because you should be able to tell how much fuel you're burning and things like that. And the argument of all the reasons to do this don't apply anymore. I fundamentally disagree. I now have a fuel totalizer and I love it and it's really great, but it is still a mechanical device. And at the end of the day, my stopwatch and knowing how many gallons I started with is one of the best ways I know to make sure I don't run out of gas. I'm a guy that hopes for the best, plans for the worst. And even if I'm not planning to go for 6+ hours, I still want to know when I'm 2.5 hours into the flight where my gas is and what I'm actually burning today. So that's kind of the point of this. These techniques were very, very common for years and years for long distance flyers. Well, actually, before I keep going, let me do this. I'm going to try to share this screen.
You got it.
And now just let me share the portion of the screen I actually want to share. Okay. Does that look halfway decent to folks?
Looks good to me.
Okay. Fuel management in the Comanche. We're still having about 50 accidents in the GA world a year involving fuel problems, fuel management issues in GA in the US. Two types is fuel starvation. Basically, they had the engine on the wrong tank. They actually had fuel on board, but that wasn't the tank that they were trying to draw off of. We have most of us have at least 4 tanks. Some of us have 6. And, that can, when you're dealing with something where you've been aloft longer than you intended, something has gone wrong, you couldn't get in where you were going, or you went there and something happened and you had to divert, and now you're down low wondering where your gas is. Add IMC and it becomes a very stressful event. You got a lot going on. The other type is fuel exhaustion. That's you ran out of all your gas. A recent study in Australia, the Australian Safety Board found that in the past 10 years, fuel exhaustion events are dropping dramatically. And they attribute that to GPS and fuel flow and totalizers and things like that, and all these new avionics. But interestingly, they found out that the number or the rates of fuel starvation accidents have not changed. So even though people are not flying longer than they have gas for, they've lost track of where the fuel is. So let me get some cons out of the way. These are reasons you're going to hear to not do this. And I agree with some of these. It will absolutely scare your passengers out of their wits, even when you tell them about it. Unless they are a savvy flyer. My wife is now to the point of, at least if I warn her, she doesn't get mad. But if I didn't warn her, she will be upset with me. It will spook other pilots. And it will spook you if you're not ready for it. If you've lost track of time and it comes up and happens, here's the danger of that startle response. You can lose enough altitude that ATC starts screaming at you. You can go off your heading. And if you're IMC, it can lead to an upset. And, these are things to be aware of. When I bought my airplane, I was VFR only. I had nothing but the fuel gauges on it. So anytime when I first started doing this, I was VMC when it happened. It quickly will become a routine, but I can tell you that in IMC, when it's unexpected, it's, it can be a little bit of a surprise. So some of the other arguments or reasons not to let it actually run dry. The idea that you could get vapor lock, especially in a fuel injected airplane, and have trouble getting it restarted. I don't fly a fuel injected airplane, so I'm not going to give too much of an opinion on this. I find it to feel it be an unlikely event, but I'm not going to say much beyond that. One issue is if you have an autopilot on while this is going on, and it does take a while to restart, you could find yourself, if you've got altitude hold, you could find yourself in a pitch trim stall situation, possibly if you're not thinking about that. There's an argument about contamination in the sumps. Again, this is something I don't think really applies to the Comanche because we don't have multiple sumps. We have one. And if you're sumping on a regular basis, running a particular tank dry doesn't really change this situation. The fuel's flowing through that sump no matter what tank you're off of. This is probably the one I don't know enough about engines to offer knowledge either way. Is there is an argument that the sudden deceleration of the engine, and then once you restore fuel, the sudden acceleration of the engine is bad for the engine. Sounds plausible to me, but I would make the point that when you learn this and know what you're doing, you're going to actually run a tank dry once. I'm not out there advocating that you run 3 tanks dry and then fly the rest of your flight on that last tank and do that every time you go flying. I don't think most of us fly that long. As you learn your airplane and you start calculating your fuel burns, and in reality, even if you had no other signs that you were about to run out of gas on that tank, you would be talking about one tank actually running dry to the point of the engine spitting or quitting. So I pretty much just covered all of that. Here's the big issue. It does maximize your range. You know where your fuel is. So ask yourself this: you've been up aloft longer than intended for whatever reason, a million different reasons why your flight could take longer than you thought. you're now down to 20. You think you got about 20 gallons on board. Do you want them in one tank or do you want them spread out over 4? That at the end of the day, to me, is why I do this. If I get down to the point where I only have 20 gallons of gas on board, I want to know exactly where it is. Because in my airplane, that means I have now been aloft for 5+ hours. Something has gone wrong because I don't plan to ever fly that long. And I'm probably now down low, shooting approaches close to the ground, and I got a lot going on. This also, you know, whether you have the electronics or not, this will tell you what you're actually burning that day at that altitude and those conditions at whatever power setting you're using. Because you've got absolute data you can use to calculate your fuel burn. The last one is one that I kind of thought was just a theoretically nice thing until I actually had a bladder collapse on me on a flight back from Philadelphia. At some point, the bladder had collapsed. I didn't know it. I was coming back from an Angel flight to Philadelphia, and somewhere around Richmond, I had a main tank run dry about 45 minutes before it should have. So I'm cruising along, fat, dumb, and happy, and all of a sudden the engine quits. It was a collapsed bladder. It had hung the fuel sender. So my fuel gauge showed that I had a half a tank of gas. No idea, you know, but the reaction was instant. I went into switching the tanks, power came right back up. And now it was a matter of going, you know, now that I'm flying again, I have all the time in the world to figure out what happened, what went wrong, and what am I going to do about it? If that were to have happened to me at low altitude, I like to think that because I do this on a fairly regular basis, because I'm familiar with it, I would have reacted exactly the same way, which was instantly switch tanks and run my, you know, my engine quit immediate action item and kept flying. Let me do this. Does anybody have any thoughts or, oh, let's see. Vacuum instruments. We're generally talking about the engine hasn't stopped spinning. So with the RPM still going, the vacuum pump is still running. And I would dare say that as long as that prop is still windmilling at a pretty decent speed, you're still getting some vacuum. I don't know the exact RPMs that vacuum pump needs, but if that vacuum pump is working to spin it up at idle, then I would assume you only need 600 or 700 RPM in order to maintain the gyros. Does anybody know better than that? Robert asked if I change the throttle position during restart. I do not. Again, at this point, I don't very often run it dry. And for me, I'm not terribly concerned about the restart. The prop is already spinning at a pretty good speed. I'm not overly concerned with the change in power. John, I'll answer that in a sec. Lonnie, I'm not sure. What do you mean by NOP? John, in my airplane, okay, just checking. in my airplane, the only sign I will get is the fuel pressure will start dropping. I'm a carbureted engine. My normal fuel pressure operating range is from 0.5 PSI to 6 PSI. So it's not, you know, I'm not like a fuel injected where I've got got high pressure in that system. Generally, I'm going to know when I'm, and I'll explain, I guess this is a good enough time to explain it. My airplane has tip tanks. They hold 15 gallons. They are not the aux tank. I'm a 58 250, so I have the 2 main tanks, and that's all it had coming out of the factory. I have the Osborne tip tanks. They're 15 gallons each. They are only for use in cruise. And I have 2 fuel selectors, one for the left side of the airplane and one for the right. It is theoretically, well, not theoretically, you can actually feed 2 tanks at a time, although it's not considered an appropriate procedure. What I do is I'll burn out the tip tanks 10 to 15 minutes at a time, and flop between the 2 tip tanks. And I'll write down my times. Now, 15 gallons an hour is 15 gallons an hour is our book burn for the 250. It's at 75% power. I'm generally between 9 and 12. I know I'm not burning that. The book value for fuel burn at 65 is about 12.5 gallons an hour. So I know that on my 30 gallons of tip tanks, or my 15 gallon in one tank, I've got a pretty good idea how much time I should get out of it. So I'm going to flop it back and forth, either 10 or 15 minutes. I use 10 because of the imbalance. But when I started, did 15. I know that I should be able to burn an hour on each tip. Once I've burned an hour on a tip, now I'm in bonus time. This is extra time that I have, and this is time I'm on alert because I know I'm beyond my book value of 15 gallons an hour. When that tank does run dry, either I catch it or it runs dry, I make the switch, I note the time, and now I do the fuel calculation. I ran X number of minutes on 15 gallons an hour. Now I know what my fuel burn is on that given day, at that altitude, at that given power setting. Now I'm burning off the last of the other tip. Now I know my rate. I should be able to calculate within a couple of minutes when it's going to run dry. That gives me a second calculation to make sure I'm right. Now that I've got a fuel totalizer on there, it's allowed me to make sure that my fuel totalizer is right, that I have the right K factor in there. So it just allows me to compare actual performance with predicted performance or measured performance. When that second tank runs dry and I go back to my mains, I know exactly how much fuel, not exactly. I know how much fuel I have on board and I know where it is. I've got a full main tank and I've got another main tank that the only thing I have missing out of that is burn climb or climb burn. So let me. So yeah, when you, as mentioned, when my tank actually runs dry, the very first thing I do is immediately turn the boost pump on. And the engine will come right back to life. On the carbureted engines, and I think the fuel injected may be the same way, when we turn the boost pump on, the fuel pushed by the electric pump bypasses the engine pump, which means there is a long section of hose full of fuel just right there by the engine, ready to go to the engine as soon as you turn that boost pump on. That fuel actually, when you turn the boost pump on, it does not push fuel through the mechanical pump. It pushes it through a bypass around it. So there's fuel right close to the engine immediately there to get the engine started again. Then I go switch my tanks and I wait 10, 15 seconds to make sure there's no air pockets or air bubbles or anything, and turn the boost pump back off. Let's see. So I'm going to open this up, let you guys read this. Anybody have an answer? Go ahead and unmute and chime in if you want.
We've got 17 gallons in a Dakota on the tip tanks.
Okay, climb rate. So I'm going to say 9 gallons. Okay. You run each tank for 1 hour. So 50, that's 30. So 39. You cruise for 2.
You got to take the climb power, though. You're climbing to 10,000. So how many minutes is that going to take you? Depends on the rate of climb.
For the sake of argument, we'll leave that as X. So you have something minus X. How much fuel do you think you have on board?
Well, the question is
you know what?
The original forecasted en route time, because it says you cruise for 2.5 more hours before reaching your destination. What was the original deal? So there's not really enough information in here to answer this.
I will tell you that the original forecasted the zero wind travel time is about 3 hours and 40 minutes.
Okay. The answer is
but
yes.
In this case, you've been at cruise now for 4.5 hours.
If you've been at cruise for 4.5 hours, I guarantee you probably are about 67 gallons is what you've used. So just to climb up to 10,000 feet, I bet you, just kind of from experience, I bet you're somewhere in there about 9 gallons.
What power setting though? Are we running 55% or are we running 75%?
Wide open throttle, 2,400 RPM.
10,000 MSL is probably going to put you around the 55% range, and your climb to
no, you'll hold 65% up past 10,000 in a 250. I don't know about a 180, Ray. Are we in a 180 or 250?
This is a 250. This is my airplane, and this was an actual flight I ended up in. This is not how I did it, but this was an actual flight. This is not how I burned my fuel. But would we all agree that we didn't really know? Does anybody know?
Well, you burned, I'm going to say you burned 9 gallons to get to 10,000 feet.
Okay.
You burned 2, you ran each tank for 1 hour, ox tanks, your tip tanks. So that's 15 gallons times 2. So that's 30. So plus the 9, we're at 39 gallons right now. Now I'm a little confused. So now you're doing another 2.5 hours?
Yep. On the mains.
Okay, so 39, and at 2.5 hours at 15 gallons, so that's 30. Okay. That's 37. So what's 39 plus 37?
Here's my question to you. At 10,000 feet, do we really burn 15 gallons an hour?
No, you're going to burn about 11, 10.5 or 11.
Do we have any idea what we burned that day?
Well, at 10,000 feet, I'm pulling 14 gallons an hour. That's 100 rich a peak.
Okay. Well, let me take you to the actual flight.
You have a JPI?
Nope, not at the time.
Oh.
So now here's how I flew this. I ran both tips until they were dry. I got to top a climb. I switched to the tips. I ran both tips until they were dry. Not for an hour. I ran them until they ran out. Both tanks ran out at 2 hours and 30 minutes.
Yep.
I got 30 minutes of free fuel. Not free, but I had an extra 30 minutes in those tip tanks.
And you got 30 minutes down range.
And I got 30 more minutes downrange before I started touching my mains. When I touched my mains,
12 gallons an hour.
How much fuel did I have left on board? I had 36 gallons minus whatever I burned in the climb when I got to top of descent. So, so what ends up happening, the minute I burned my tip tanks off, I knew I had 30 gallons in my right main, and my left main was 30 gallons minus whatever I used for climb. Now I have a known quantity somewhere. This is the biggest thing to me is somewhere en route, I had solid absolute numbers of actual performance that day. Now I get there. I've run for 2.5 hours. In cruise, I switch between the mains every 30 minutes. 2 hours later, I'm at top of descent. How much fuel do I have on board? I have 36 gallons minus the climb burn. I should have 18 gallons in my right main. I should have 18 gallons minus climb burn in my left main. Who said 9 gallons for the climb?
Me, Alan.
Bingo, you win a prize because I put 21 gallons in the left main when I got to St. Louis. That's what I put in it. So here's what happened. This is supposed to be about a 4-hour flight. I get aloft, the winds are about 45 knots higher than expected. I'm in solid IMC the entire way because I don't dare go any higher because of how bad the winds are. It's low IFR between me and St. Louis. It's 100 and 200 overcast everywhere I can find on my iPad. I have to make a choice. Do I continue to my destination or do I bail out now and know that if I manage to not get in, I'm stuck in crap weather as far as I can see, and I'm going to have to fly it and get in at minimum somewhere. And that's the decision tree I'm making at cruise.
Were you on top?
I knew what my numbers were.
Ray, were you on top?
No, I was not.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I was afraid to get on top because the tops were supposed to be about 4,000 feet above me.
No ice?
Nope. This was summertime.
Okay.
Ice was not a factor. If ice had been a factor, I wouldn't have gone. Let's just get that part straight. So my point is, where would you rather be in this? Wondering where the hell your fuel is when you begin your descent? Or knowing I should have X amount in my right main. At this point, my decision tree is simple. I'm flying on the right main. If I have to go to my left main, I'm declaring an emergency and screaming like a little girl on the radio for help. So when I landed, this ended up being a 5-hour and 15-minute flight. I went into the soup at 400 feet when I took off. I broke out at 700 feet on final. If I'd known what I was getting into, I'd have never taken off. But when I was able to make good decisions because I had good data. If I didn't know how much fuel I had, I probably would have been tempted to try to go get in somewhere. And the decision matrix for me would have pushed me into trying to fly an approach to minimums somewhere along the route. For my skill level at that time, that would have been very dangerous.
So here's a quick question.
Yeah.
I have a 63 Comanche, so I run it like you. So I take off, climb on the left main, and then I'll burn, off the left aux, and I used to do it 30 minutes, but being a bigger guy, now I might go an hour on the left because I'm trying to balance the fuel with my weight against, but it doesn't really matter if I'm really trying to go. But then once I sit there and I'm out of the aux, I'm sitting there and now I'm down to the mains. So I'll pretend more or less that I've got an hour and a half left in the left main because I took off on that. And then I got a full right main. So if I was really, I'm just kind of playing this out of my head. If I was really trying to stretch it, not only would I be burning the aux to maybe, I just calculated out, basically, if I'm up at 10 grand, I'm burning maybe 12 and a half gallons an hour, maybe a little less, but I'm going to get about 1.1, maybe 1.2. Interesting, in your scenario, you said you got an hour and 15 minutes out of each tank. So yeah, maybe if you're down at 10 and a half gallons an hour, something like that, 10 gallons an hour. So the point coming back though, is that if you were really trying to stretch your leg, you just had to get there. Like I say, it almost would behoove, if I burned 28 gallons of known gas out of the right tank at a known low consumption rate, because I'm up at altitude, I'm going to get farther down range on that tank of fuel. And then I got an hour and a half left when I get back, or when I switch to the left. And of course, hopefully by then it's time to come down. I mean, my longest leg has probably been 5.5, almost 540. And that was from Phoenix to Fredericksburg, Texas. That was way too long, but anyways, we ended up doing it. But I've done a couple of times. I went Grand Junction almost nonstop to Atlanta one time. I probably could have done it. We actually just stopped, my wife and I, in Biloxi because we were just flat out getting tired. The weather was kind of closing in. But it's imperative that anyway, we bailed and went to a casino down to Biloxi. So, but it's imperative that you need to know where your gas is. I totally agree. And I have a question just for the group. You don't have to answer this now, but this is more for the 2-tank folks and the 180, because my friend has a 250. And so when we flew it and we ferried it up to Chicago for the gear AD, that's the first time he and I had ever flown his airplane. And again, so now I've got, 56 gallons instead of the 90 that I'm used to, or 86. And so, again, my philosophy was, or my thought was, I want to know where that gas is at all times, because the second leg was definitely at night. So I ended up burning it all out of the left tank, until I knew it was getting close to we're done. I didn't pull the engine out trick. Of course, that made it uncomfortable, but I've been teaching my friend because I had to hand fly it because of the weight imbalance. But it's always funny because during this past summer, while I've been teaching my friend to fly his Comanche, he's real good. Every 15 minutes, he's swapping his gas and all that. And I finally look at him. I go, Dave, how much gas you got in your tank, in your right tank? He goes, well, I don't know. I go, yeah, exactly. You've swapped 6 times. I can't keep up with you anymore. I don't know where your gas is. And of course, now you have crappy gauges like all of us do, mine included. So anyway, my point being is, you need to sit there and have a methodical plan when you're burning fuel and how much, and get a fuel figure number, whether you use an old whiz wheel or algebra, but
and the thing is that 2-tank management, I agree with you. So 2-tank management to me is different from 4 or 6-tank management. And I know that the FAA is at the point nowadays where 4 and anything more than 2 tanks makes them nervous. They don't trust us to keep track of where the hell our fuel is.
Yeah.
And honestly, we haven't done as GA, we haven't done a great job at convincing them that we're keeping track. That's one of the problems. It's very easy to lose track.
I'd be interested to hear how 2-tank fellows run their fuel operations, just out of curiosity.
I I can tell you at my home field, just in general, and I don't know about Comanche, but in general, at my home field, it's one of two schools of thought. It's either 30 minutes aside and they just run that the whole way, or it's what is they pretty much run one side till it's empty and go to the other.
Yeah.
That's, and I, that's like, arguing Ford versus Chevy. You can't really.
Sure, I agree. I mean, swapping tanks every 15 minutes unless you have to. Again, you got tip tanks, so your moment you're on is a different animal. I get that. So
the other thought to that, and this was brought up to me, and the reason I started it this way was the guy that I learned from used to do a lot of long range ferrying. And he would always go up and burn 15 minutes off of each tank at cruise, then go to his fuel burn plan, because he wanted to make sure that each tank was supplying fuel before he ended up over water.
Right.
Yeah, makes sense.
I don't do that.
I run my tanks a little different. So when I first get up, I run my left tip tank because I sit on left, and like Alan, I'm challenged horizontally. And so I run my left. Yeah, I run my left tip tank for 15 minutes, and then I switch over and I run my right tip tank for 30, and then I go back to my left tip tank for 30, and then I go to my right for 30, and then I go empty and empty. So that initial 15 minutes, I figure I got 15 out of the left. If I run 15 out of the right, they're even, where the reality is I can have a 15-minute disparity in between them for the weight. You're only talking a few pounds, 15 minutes.
That's perfectly valid. It's you're balancing the fuel. Honestly, the reason I do it this way is my left wing is heavy.
So is mine.
This is what
nobody can tell me why.
My argument is I don't care whether you run for 5 minutes or 10 minutes aside or 30 or run one tip and then the other. What I do advocate is pick, for me, I want to burn my tips off because I cannot land on them. By the book, I have by accident, but they're not there. They're placarded for cruise only.
Yeah.
I'm going to get them out of the picture. They're going to give me a really good fuel burn. They're going to tell me what my fuel burn is. That's the number I'm going to use for that particular flight. And it just, if I can't use them down low maneuvering and doing an approach, then might as well use them while I can.
Can I add something here, which is that often enough I burn both my tips down empty, and actually I'm not sure what brand they are. I thought they were Osborne, but I can fit almost 18 gallons in each one. But after you burn them dry, and then you take off, you fill them and go on your next leg. It doesn't seem like it's that far from the tip tank to the engine, but it's actually around 3 miles, I'm pretty sure. Because when you turn that to that tip tank, whichever one it is, and there's nothing in that line, it takes about an hour for that fuel to reach your engine. And
yes, and that's part of if I run my tips dry, I re-port them on the ground after I fuel.
I do now.
How do you do what? Say that again, Ray.
All right. So the tip tanks on the Comanche, it's a pretty long fuel run. And when you run them dry, it can be hard to get them running again.
Right. Get the juice in there.
The way you've got to pull the gas uphill to get it flowing again. It's like a siphon. You've unprimed this line. Mm-hmm. It can be a long time to get that suction from your boost pump to come through the cabin, through the sump, up the wing, and over this big hump that the fuel line makes.
And really, it might be 10 seconds, but it feels like an hour.
In the air, it feels like a really long time.
Ray, how fast does your fuel pressure gauge go down? Have you watched it?
Yeah, I'd say from the first early tick marks to it being on its peg, 20-ish, 25 seconds. It's not, I mean, it's something just I've trained myself to look at. You know, I knew when I was on my what I called my free, my borrowed time, my bonus time, I tried to keep a pretty good eye on it.
Your hand's on the fuel selector and the right eye is on the fuel pressure.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, what I've learned is I don't switch tanks first. The first thing I do is hit the boost pump. The engine comes right back immediately, turn the empty tank off, and then turn a tank on. It's a quirk with the tips. You do not ever, ever, ever want to have both tips on when one of them's empty. You will unport the other line. So it's in the little flight manual supplement for the tips as a warning. But if you've run a tip tank dry, you need to shut that tank off before you switch to the other tip. And I've just found the tip tank, turning the boost pump on gives you that slug of fuel that's in the lines right away. And then you've got, you need what, 5 more seconds to get the other valve open, and it never misses a beat.
That's right. No, I don't have 4 tanks. I only have 2.
Okay.
So 180. So
how do you shut a tip tank off? Just deselect it?
The early 250s, at least, I have 2 fuel selector valves. I have one that has off, left tip, left main.
Oh, wow.
And I have a second one that is for the right side. It's off, right tip, and right main. So if I'm switching between tips, if I run a left tip dry, I can turn a right tank on and the left tip is still on, but I'm only drawing air from it. So I'm just throwing that warning out. If you have the dual selectors like I do, you need to turn the empty tank off before you bring a new tank online. If I was switching from my left tip to my left main, moving that selector would do both at the same time.
Mm.
Ray, I have the same setup that you do, 59-250 with tips, 2 selectors. If I were to use your system, let's say, and get one of my right tip tank almost dry, and I fed at the same time the left main, then the right tip goes dry, is that going to cause a problem? Is that going to cavitate a line? Is that going to do something that I don't want?
My understanding is that it can.
That it can.
It can cause the line. It basically, your fuel pump will start sucking air because air is easier to draw than fuel.
Okay, good to know. Thank you.
Now, honest answer with the mains, I don't know, but I know it'll do it with the tips, and it will unport the tip. So,
copy that. Thank you.
I will tell you a little trick I use when I'm on occasion. If I've got fuel in the tips and I've got air in one of my mains, once I'm down in the hangar, if I'm trying to move fuel out of the tips, if I got 10 gallons in the left main and I got a full tip tank on the right, I'll leave it open on the ground. It will drain out of that right main into that left. And the problem is if I don't have 20 gallons of air in the left main, it will still drain. It'll go all over the bottom floor of my hangar. Ask me how I know. I moved the switches the wrong way one time. I ended up losing about 10 gallons of fuel all over my hangar floor.
The laser ignition system did a nice job of extending my range, my 180. But that broke about a year ago. I couldn't get it fixed, so I'm back to standard mags now. But it's amazing what that spark advance can do.
And I put the electro air in about 2 years ago, and similar experience.
You get up high and that thing advances and you're getting pretty good. You don't lose so much speed and you just chug right along and your fuel burns low.
Yeah. So has anybody not had a tank run dry in cruise? Are we all familiar with how loud quiet is?
I've never had it.
Purpose or accidental?
Yeah, I'm not an iron butt some bitch to be able to sit in there plane that long either. So,
well,
Ray, Michael Moran, Northern California here. My experience is there is absolutely nothing louder than the sound of a dead engine.
I would agree.
And there's some further observations, if I might just interject. First of all, I know that this is on how to run a tank dry, but and that's good training. But quite frankly, good fuel management begins before you ever start the engine for the trip. And generally speaking, there's never any good reason to run a tank dry. You should know your airplane. You should know how much fuel it burns. Ray, you're spot on how to figure out how that day on that flight, what your fuel burn is. Those are all good things to do. There was an earlier comment about somebody didn't seem to think that it might be hard on an engine for a sudden stop or a sudden restart. I would respectfully suggest that the higher powered engines with the more sophisticated crankshaft counterbalance weights, some engines that can be, being too quick on the throttle one way or the other, particularly on an unplanned shutdown at higher RPM or a restart without bringing the throttle back, can be very hard on an engine. And with respect to the questions on how do you do your fuel planning on a two-tanked airplane, I've flown personally over 200 different types of aircraft, very little in the Comanche, but I do own a 260B at this time, and it's got 4 tanks in it. But techniques that I've used in the past, particularly in Cessnas with the bladder tanks, if you're in a situation where you really need to know where your fuel is and you need to get all the fuel out of a wing, technique I used in Alaska many times is bank the airplane a little bit, get that fuel off the flat floor of a tank down into the under the inside edge there where the ports are, and suck all the fuel out. Now, I've flown a lot of engines with fuel injection and run tanks not to an engine stoppage, but to where the amount left in the tank really doesn't matter for purposes of your flight. And you'll get a fluctuation on the fuel flow indicator. And, when that happens, switch tanks. Get some fuel going to the engine, and it'll be good for the engine. And anyway, prior proper planning before you ever push that throttle ahead the first time. You're not going to have to run a tank dry, but when it does, be prepared. That's the loudest noise you'll ever hear. So be prepared for it.
So,
hey, Ray. End of comments.
So I just hold on just a second. I do want to respond because I agree with 99% of everything you've just said, but I want to make this point. A lot of people refer to if you ever need to run a tank dry, if you ever need to know how much you have on board, and the assumption is that you're going to know if you're doing a long flight. You're going to know if you're going to be aloft for 6 hours, and that is poor planning. And my argument and my belief is this: if I knew it was going to be a 6-hour flight, I wouldn't have done it. I want to know what I'm burning that day. I want to know where my fuel is every single flight, because I can't look 2 hours into the future and know what's going to happen when I get where I'm going. I want to build a habit pattern as a pilot that when the day comes that I'm flying out west instead of on the East Coast where there's an airport that I can glide to from 10,000 feet just about everywhere I fly. You know, the day is going to come where I'm not flying on the East Coast, that things don't go according to plan. And when that happens, it is too late for me to say, oh, let me go burn my tip tank dry and figure out what my burn is today. If you don't make doing that fuel analysis a habit pattern, you won't have the benefit of it the day it counts. And so part of this too is the title of this is Running a Tank Dry. Please understand I'm not advocating that that's what you do, as in let the engine go quiet. It will happen if you manage your fuel the way I'm describing, because you will get an ATC call and you'll miss the flutter of the PSI on your fuel. It will happen. I'm just telling you. What I'm saying is, don't necessarily be afraid of it. It is a tool. It has a purpose. You don't use this when you're mucking around at 3,000 feet on a $100 hamburger run. That's not the proper place for this. This is not an excuse to go flight plan a 7-hour flight at wide open throttle at high altitude. So, you know, let me get to my warnings, because I want to address, I hear what you're saying and I agree with most of it, but I want to make sure that what I'm advocating is not being misunderstood. The book says that at 7,000 feet, we're running at 75% power at 24 squared, and that is burning 15 gallons an hour. I don't fly at 7,000 feet. I fly higher than that. I know I'm not burning 15 gallons an hour. I always flight plan 15 gallon an hour burn. At 5 hours and 15 minutes, folks, I'm telling you, I am declaring emergency fuel, period. When I went to St. Louis and I was at 5 hours and 15 minutes en route, if I had to go missed, my plan was to immediately declare emergency fuel. It was going to be that simple. I didn't declare it beforehand because the ceilings were at 700. There was nobody around. There was nothing I needed. I had direct to the airport. Had they asked me to vectors for sequence, I would have declared minimum fuel immediately.
I'm going to hold you up right there.
Yeah.
Ray, again, as an ex-airline guy, minimum fuel doesn't mean jack shit to an ATC controller. He might go, oh, okay, yeah, noted. If you're that low, declare an emergency.
Well, and I'm gonna. I've had days where we've threatened to declare minimum fuel, and they give me shortcuts or they make me number two. My point is this: if I know there's a chance, you know, to me it's real simple. The minute I know I'm going to touch my reserve fuel, I'm emergency fuel.
Right.
I'm not waiting till I have 45 minutes left. It's when I think I'm going to touch it. And my 45 minutes is based on I have 6 hours of gas in my airplane. And I'm telling you right now that the FAA is so tired of people waiting to declare a fuel emergency until they've run out of gas, that if you are touching your reserve fuel and you declare an emergency, you are not getting in any trouble from anybody. You're doing what you're supposed to do. Just don't, please, for the love of God, not let that stop you from declaring an emergency.
I'll reiterate that one more time. I get just, because I remember this was one of our questions and one of our little workbooks at FedEx, you know, but it was like, say you're going from Memphis to LA. We're talking jet talk now here, sorry guys, but the point is still true. And all of a sudden you look at the flight management system and it says you're going to land at LA below company min fuel and you're over Albuquerque, you actually need to declare an emergency right then and there, you know, to do something, because you can't just keep pucking along. and think, oh, well, I hope it gets better. Anyway, I always thought that was kind of funny, you know, and hey, I'm over Albuquerque and it's clearing a million. Yeah, but when you get to LA, you're going to land below minimum fuel. So what you just said is exactly right. If you think you're going to touch that 45-minute IFR reserve or that 30 in VFR reserve, then you need to start talking and declaring an emergency. Don't wait till you get there, you know.
So listen, I just want to really push this second bullet point. These fuel planning numbers, these fuel numbers and learning it en route is not to extend your planned endurance. It is a tool to ensure that you have the best information available while you're in the air. And I bring you back to my St. Louis flight. You're in the soup, it's solid clag. Everywhere around you is 200 overcast. You know, I knew that day what my burn was. And I knew I had the fuel to continue to better weather. And today, I would have no qualms about shooting an approach to 200.5. It's what I do. It's what I'm trained to do for a living. It's not that big a deal to me anymore. Back then, that was about the scariest thing I could think of. This allows you to make decisions with real info. And that's what I advocate for.
Hey, Ray, I'll go ahead. I'll wrap it up.
Now, on that, I was going to go ahead and wrap it up. If there are other questions, I'll get off my soapbox.
Nope, go ahead.
I will. Adam, let me answer that last question about more trustworthy fuel gauges. I don't trust any of it. I want to have my own numbers, and I like it when my equipment agrees with me. But then nobody makes a fuel gauge out there I'm willing to bet my life on.
Andrew's got a hand raised. Go ahead and unmute, Andrew.
Oh, I was going to say, especially with, when you have 6 tanks in a twin, if you start leaving, I have found, especially for long flights, 5-hour flights, if I start leaving an unknown sort of guesstimate of fuel in the tanks, I have fuel all over the place that I'm really not going to be able to use, which does me no good if I need it. If I airport, I was getting, thought I was going to land that, isn't available. And I hope the other one's close. At least I know what I have. So I have, a very detailed kneeboard chart, and I write down when I start. I have 2 totalizers. They just tell me to run the left and the right, but not which tank. I don't trust my gauges, and I don't even trust those totalizers. So I start out with and exactly when I turn the tank on, how much total fuel flowed, and that's one of my big in-flight tasks is keeping that left and right side of the airplane to keep track of it. And you tend to find I usually have my hand on the fuel selector. Within a couple of minutes, I'm kind of hanging around there for which engine I think is going to start running rough and die, and I'm going to get off that tank. I'll flip. I know that I used all that fuel. I'll flip over. The engine won't die, but it'll start running rough. Flip the fuel pump on with the left hand, and if you flip the selector with the right down by the floor, and then keep going and record the time and the fuel when I switch that had flown through the tanks. And then when I fuel up on the ground, I know what I calculate every tank should have, and I know what I put in because I record the start and end fuel flow on the gas pump for every single tank. And I'm constantly recalibrating those along with my dipstick to make sure everything is going the way I think it should. And that works out pretty well. I really do know. I've found this, barring something going wrong or a leak or something else, I know what marks on my fuel dipstick are correct and which ones are nonlinear. And I know, and I end up having all the fuel available to me should I need it. And I think that really is essential. I agree with this presentation. The fuel scatter all over the airplane doesn't do you any good. You've got to use it in a consistent manner to get your resources back to the mains, and that's where your fuel is and should be. But at least on a long flight, it's just not a good idea to have 5 gallons here and 10 gallons there, because you don't want to go hunting for it. You don't know how much is there in the first place. Let's say you were doing an approach, you can't go onto a tank with an unknown quantity. It could fail at a disastrous time. So that's just been my experience over the years, and I find that especially with 6 tanks, it is a lot of fuel that you would lose track of if you didn't burn them dry, in my opinion. Anyway,
that's
yeah, that was pretty much what the FAA enforcement guy said. That was a good point. Gary Gray's got his hand raised as well.
Hey guys, couple of things. As a new Comanche pilot, I took a long trip up to Louisville, and I was probably coming in with a little bit here, a little bit there. In other words, 5 to 8 gallons in every tank. Beautiful night. My home airport, and I decided to do a touch and go around. Well, you know, you're banking everything. All of a sudden, I'm hearing a little bit of shudder. So you really do have to try to keep everything in your mains at the last minute. My last annual, I added a fuel pump light because invariably I would be taking off or whatever and leaving the fuel pump on, and that nice little blue light helps. And then the final comment is I've got the Electronics International fuel flow system. It works great. I tried one time to go and mess with the K factors and try to tweak that out, and it just got worse and worse. And I went back to factory settings, and I pull up to the ramp, and I'll pump within 0.2 of what I think I burned. So I think that's one of the best things you could do is if you don't have a totalizer, get one. Thank you.
Those are great comments. Can I, if it's all right with you, Ray, do you mind if I read into the Zoom window some of the answers to some of these questions from Zach Grant? Is this an okay time?
Yeah, let me just make one quick comment. And
absolutely.
I totally and heartily endorse fuel flow. I love it. Australia has the numbers to prove that it is stopped. It is lowered. They believe it's the reason fuel exhaustion rates have declined. But fuel starvation rates haven't. It is one of many tools, but managing where the fuel is the thing that has not changed, or at least the results of that have not changed in the past years with the new technology. So just throwing that out there, you know, the only tank you know the amount of fuel in is the one that's dry. That tank is out of play.
Yeah. As Zach often says, the way that our gauges were certified under CAR 3, they had to indicate appropriately as the fuel quantity dropped, but the only place they had to be accurate was at 0. ATF agent, you've got your hand raised.
All right, hold on, let me find the...
You're unmuted now. Oh, you're muted again.
Aaron, hey, yay.
Hi. I don't know if you guys can see me or not.
Yep, I got you.
You like my shirt? Okay. I own a gun store, so nobody get upset. So a few things. I've just been kind of taking notes here. I do a lot of like cross country. So we've got a place in Florida. My wife's family's from Philadelphia. Grandparents lived at Lake of the Ozarks, like 45 minutes, maybe in the air, half hour in the air. So I guess not super long, but still cross country-ish. And then we like to go to like Sykeston and Memphis and stuff too, down in Gaston. So we do a lot of cross country. So I'm a big advocate of climbing out. As soon as I get to cruise, tip tanks go on. One thing I do is I run, I have a 250 like you. So I run my right main and my left tip tank with the fuel pump on until I see the fuel pressure stabilize, and I turn it off and I watch it. It'll come down a little bit, then it'll pop back up. No big deal. Do that 2 reasons. A, this was Dad's Comanche, so I've been flying this thing since I was Piper's age. And with that being said, that was one thing that he taught me was make sure you put that fuel pump on when you're switching between these tanks. Mm-hmm. Okay, cool. Also prevents the air bubbles after refueling when you do run a tank dry. Yes, I see. Fuel flow. I have a Shaden fuel flow and I have a JPI in the airplane. And I like to run the airplane about 12 gallons, 11 to 12 gallons an hour in there. And then when I refuel, I look at total hours flown versus what I'm going to pump. And I make my best guesstimate of, hey, I'm going to pump 75 gallons. And it generally comes up to about, within a couple of gallons. I take a photo with my phone, add it into my ForeFlight. And so every time I fuel up, that's in my ForeFlight log, and I can go back and I can see and average out about what I do per hour. There's one more thing I wanted to mention. I made sticks to put in my mains to see how much fuel I have in there. And they're on the very conservative side. When it says like 5 gallons, it's really closer to like 8, and 10 is probably closer to about 13 or 14. So I always like to have more fuel on board than actually indicated. I don't know if that makes sense, but just some of the things that I do to kind of track stuff.
Thank you. And Dutchman, looks like you've got your hand raised as well, but you're still muted.
Yeah, I'm unmuted now.
Okay.
Hey, it's funny. I got back to my plane today in Minnesota, and the guys had some concerns. They told me the right tank was once again not draining. And so I rolled my eyes because I tested it out last time I was here a couple of weeks ago. And here's what they did. They ran both tanks active at the same time. And I told them you can't do that because the Comanche will not drain equal when you give it the opportunity. If you set the selection to one tank at a time, it will drain. So we've been flying today. Oh, and lo and behold, we vigorously tested the right tank. It drains just fine because the right tank was like halfway empty when we were done. I'm correct in assuming that is typical for Comanches, right? You must select one tank at a time. I never have 2 of them on at the same time.
I'm assuming you have the dual fuel selectors like I do.
Yes, and I have tip tanks. Mine is a 59.
One tank only for exactly that reason.
I know.
Yeah, I've found when I tried to run off like both tanks or both mains, they never run even.
No. Ever. It just won't. And also, it doesn't fuel balance.
So, funny you mentioned fuel balancing. On the ground, after I shut down and put the airplane away and I want to balance out my tanks for the next flight, I'll leave it on both mains and they will equalize. And I will leave it on both tip tanks and they will equalize. And when I come back and I stick my tanks, they're on the exact same level on my stick on both of them, even though I know I ran 30 minutes longer on one main or one tip than the other. So if you want to balance them, it takes time. It's gravity fed. It will do that. Now, a word of caution. You need to make sure you got room in the tank. If you're going to go from the other thing you can do is you can go right tip to left main and left main to right tip. So there's been times that I've, just run off mains because I'm out running in the pattern. I'm doing short hops between airports. I'm going out and doing maneuvers. So I don't even touch my tip tanks, but I want to move the fuel from the tip tanks into my mains because I'm operating on my mains all the time, except in cruise when I go to my tip tanks. And you need to make sure you have room. And so what you can do is you can turn on one of your tips and one of your mains because it's opposite and pull the cap off and then go sweep out your hanger and keep coming back and looking. Otherwise you'll overflow the tank.
Yeah.
Not that I've done 10 gallons of gas went all over my hangar floor that one day by accident because I left it that
my
way.
Dad did that. So there's a lot of wisdom coming from the dad there.
Because it throws it out of the vents, right?
Yeah, the right tip will drain to try to drain with the left main, and left main being full, it'll just push it right out the vent.
On the subject of the vents being under the floor, How do you guys sump the fuel before you fly? Because obviously, do you just crawl under and just deal with it, or is there something on the American ones that isn't on the British Comanche? I mean,
well, I'll tell you,
I have a valve for that.
I sump all of my tanks after I fly. I sump the tank I'm going to take off on before I fly. I have to crawl underneath the airplane to sump the tank, then crawl back up, reset the fuel selectors. And with tip tanks, I've got to run the tips for 30 to 45 seconds to know that I'm getting fuel through the lines and out of the tank. It's a lot of gas that ends up in my bucket down there.
How do you calculate that time?
I'm sorry?
How do you calculate 35, 45 seconds? How did you?
I trust, because I'm silly, I trust the flight manual supplement for Osborne. It says I must run that sump for at least 30 seconds for the fuel to clear the lines. And so I give it 50% more just to make sure.
So does your Osborne tip tanks not have the little little nipple on the bottom side to sump?
They do, but they like to get stuck.
Okay, yeah, because I
ended up with my finger on the bottom of my tip tank one day, screaming for help across the airport for somebody to bring me a big white bucket to let the 15 gallons sump out of because it's stuck open.
Okay. Now, the other thing I do to sump is I leave my mains on both, so they equalize. So then I go and I sump, and I get, I guess, technically both mains.
Maybe.
Yeah, that's my justification. I left it on both. I sumped. Off we go to the races.
Can anybody tell me how to find out the exact length of the fuel line from the tip tank, or from any of the tanks, all of the tanks, back to the fuel selector? I have a 250. I've been trying to calculate how much fuel I should sump out of each tank.
I don't know what the aux is, but I figure you measure the length, however far off the center of the airframe that aux tank is, and probably
it's a Comanche town group, Comanche, Piper Comanche on the flight plane. And they have an instructor talking about the importance of running your tank dry, which I always do.
Silence him, Pete. He doesn't know he's on.
Okay. Who's that?
Andrew Burton. He just didn't know he's hot micing.
Okay.
And on the length, so for the 6-tank Comanches, this is CJ, obviously the tips you can sump directly. So the mains, it looks like it's about 15 seconds. I think it's a 3/8, 10 to 15 seconds. I think it's a 3/8 line. Greg Peel just installed new fuel lines for the auxes. And so I will get you that answer in just a moment. I'm sending a text to him now. But this came up in a previous Zoom. And so it was, how long do we need to sump to make sure we're actually getting fuel out of the tank? Ray, I actually asked your exact question of George Richmond about when do you sump your tanks? And George, especially because there's a lot of winter flying that happens up in the Northeast, gave me a really good answer. George suggested that you switch tanks and sump all of your tanks before departure, because what if, and this includes people who are in warmer climates as well, what if you climb into frozen air and you do happen to have some kind of water in that line, and you're over Lake Michigan or some other place where you don't have a ton of options, especially in the 2-tank birds, and you go to switch to your other tank and you can't get any fuel because the water in your line froze.
And there's absolute validity to that. I'm not saying mine's the right answer. I'm just saying that's what I do.
Yeah. No, I hear you.
I will.
But I wanted to, Adam, before you go on, I just wanted to pass this into the group. And then Chris Huffnagel and 2 other people have their hands raised. I have some texts back just because everybody's been asking questions. And Ray, you had said if you could get information on the fuel injected Comanches, would this be a good time to read that in? Yeah, and I mean, the short version is fuel injected, you don't get much warning. The needle falls. Yes, exactly. So but there was, but just this is a terrible day for Zach. He can never be here, but he's usually trying to stand by and pass information back from his meetings. He's got his standing. He said, so there were a couple of things that came up. As Ray just said, the carbureted engines have a bit of warning in that the fuel pressure drops, but the float bowl will still keep the engine running for 15 seconds or so. Whereas with the fuel injected engines, as Ray just said, the fuel pressure drops and the engine stops. Regarding any warnings or advice on fuel injected tank dry management, he said, not really. Everything's, this is important. Everything is certified to start after running dry, but fuel pumps don't pump air well. And sometimes people expect things to happen faster than they do. And remember, time goes really, really slowly when you're waiting for the fan to start up front. Because you've got to get the air out of the line before the fuel can get to the engine to start it. So just know that there's going to be, if you can't plan it, that you're going to have a little bit of a quiet time while you're waiting for that fuel to reach, but it is certified to restart after running dry. There was a comment about POH recommendations, and Zach said the POH actually says to use this tool to run your tanks dry in the early years. So it said for maximum range, run tanks dry. I hope that's everything I have to read in. And the sources on A&P, CFII, MEI, et cetera, ATP, with 2 singles and a twin in the family. I'm going to shut up now and let the other raised hands go.
I guess let's go to Dutchman. If you don't mind, let me go on to Gary. I'll come back to you in a minute. Gary Gray, if you want to go unmute.
Hey guys, the question about what do you put underneath the plane? I have a large baking pan and then one of those grabber things that you use to pick up trash, and you just slide that over there. And if you get it anywhere close, it'll drop into the plane. And then the other thing I made, you know, if you're familiar with the $5 siphon pumps that you can buy at any auto store, all right, I bought 2 of those and rigged them with made a longer hose. And that way I can transfer between one tank to the other. Now, the reason I came up with that is I went to a race one time. Full of gear. I have 3 people on board. Please top off the main tanks. Everything's written down, big letters. We came out the next day and everybody's gone from the race. And I'm checking my 2 tanks. Everything's full. I checked the aux tanks. They were also full. Now, I was definitely going to be over gross. Would the Comanche make it, et cetera, et cetera? Yeah, but you don't want to, you don't want to do anything that you know is absolutely wrong. So not having any other way to do it, we drained 2 aux tanks, 30 gallons on the ground through the pitcock. And basically you just open it up and stuff a rag in it. So that is one thing to think about. You're on a trip, you're on a trip and you're trying to fly lightly. If you only want fuel in 1 tank or 2 tanks, you need to be sure that the other ones didn't get filled by mistake.
Yep. Absolutely. Chris.
And that's why I think his exact thing is why I think the 250 with tip tanks is the best combination, because you can leave the tips half full. Doesn't matter. Doesn't dry the bladders. There's no bladders.
Chris.
Hi, guys. Thank you. Based on that last story, I do have a comment. My question is actually something different, but I have a PA-30 Twin Comanche 1966 with 6 fuel tanks, and misfueling is an easy event if you're not right there watching the fuelers. And one of the things I've learned, underneath the wing fuel cap, I will often put a post-it right there that says like KSDL, no fuel. And that will stop people, because I've gotten phone calls when they've been found at another airport that I forgot to take it out of. So that might be a helpful hint for some people. My question goes back to when you were discussing fuel selector valves on the single engines. Because this is a twin, I haven't really heard anybody talk about this. I had an event happen this summer where I was using ox fuel on, I have 6 tanks, main, ox, and tip. I was using the ox fuel on a cross country. And at about the halfway tank point, I noticed the fuel gauge quit moving any lower. However, the fuel flow, everything remained the same. As I got closer to my destination, which wasn't very far away, I switched back to the main tank and noticed that my fuel in this right side main tank was lower than the left. And typically my twin Comanche, the fuel burns are almost identical. It's extremely predictable. I've been flying it for almost 15, 20 years. When I landed, got out, checked with the dipstick to see where the fuels were, sure enough, although I had ox fuel selected, that engine was getting fuel from a main tank. And I've never been able to repeat that. My mechanic and I looked it over. The only thing I can come up with is that at some point while it was in the ox detent, it perhaps vibrated enough that perhaps it shifted the fuel selectors so that it started drawing from the main. I'm really not sure, but I'm wondering, has anybody else experienced any unusual thing like that, or do you have any advice?
I was on board, and I have a twin Comanche with 6 tanks also, and I have at times been less than fully confident in those detents being as reliable. You know, I really feel carefully, and whenever I change, I wiggle around and really make sure, is this actually something that's where it's supposed to be, and then try to check. You know, and keep an eye on things, but they aren't really firm, I think, as far as I would like to be, even though I checked it out and have had it checked out and everything is as it should be. And one of the selectors is actually one of the new Parker stainless steel ones, so perfect. But it's just, yeah, that probably what happens to you. I also noticed on those, a separate issue, but I found when I've been replacing bladders, you know, the fuel senders that we have this resistor strip inside that sending unit, and it can be pretty non-linear. Some deoxide, if you take it apart and clean it, if you put it on a ohm meter and move that float, you'll see it'll have gaps and misses sometimes, depending if it's clean or not, or just imperfections. So depending where it is, the linear change in ohms isn't as linear as you'd like it to be. There are some digital senders out there that somebody makes for our planes that look really nice, but I haven't bitten the bullet because I rely on keeping track of the fuel flow more. I never trust the gauges anyway. So, but you're right. It's a great thing to see if it's actually coming from the tank you think it is. Yeah. But maybe those digital senders would be a worthwhile investment.
Yeah, I really don't think it was a sender because the fuel.
No, no, I don't think it was in your case. I think it was not in the detent or vibrated looser. Maybe it wasn't ever fully positioned. But if it's in position, I don't think unless there's something really wrong with the valve, how it could not flow from the tank it's supposed to. It had to be somehow in between. But I'd have to take mine apart and take a closer look at it to see how it could do that.
Yeah, we did, after the fact, we made a small adjustment to make sure it went closer to the detent. And of course, since then, I'm much more diligent about keeping a close eye. But at some point, halfway through the use of that tank, it moved itself.
It moved. Oh, wow. So, yeah, because there is an adjustment of linkage. You can change the linkage arm length so that, you know, when it's pointing where it's supposed to be, it's actually in that detent. But those do require adjustment. Or at least in my case.
I had the same thing happen in my twin. I just picked it up from Muskogee, Oklahoma. And I had that fuel migration thing, and it surprised me. I ran the ox tank dry. And I disassembled all that stuff and look at the various detents and the little dimples that you're supposed to lock into, and there's like 5 different. Well, 1, 2, 3. There'd be the little selector detent thing that you got to make sure the pin's in the hole. Then it's got to be coordinated with that push rod to move the actual valve, and then also that whole thing has to line up with the little micro switch that's down there so you can get your fuel. So it's if I could, like, I love my Comanche, but I really hate the fuel management system in it. You know, it's between the seats, you can't see it. If you ever take it off, it's really hard. I changed out the micro switches and stuff like that, and it was a nightmare. I ended up like super gluing some of the little nuts on my finger so I could get the micro switches in place on this thing. It's just something that I'm consistently just sticking my hand down there and just wiggling them around and make sure that
yeah, same. I don't try on a flight. That's the one thing you find yourself doing. I guess the only consolation is, what is it, the 310 Cessna, that if you don't burn the tip tanks first, the fuel pumps overboard, or there's some crazy fuel systems that are worse than ours. But I don't know. I think if you burn the wrong order.
That is true on a 310.
Yeah, the mains are the tips. The oxes are inboard. Let's go. Scott D's got his hand up, and then I've got to come back to Dutchman and ATF agent. So Scott.
Yeah, just a couple quick comments. When I fly a main empty, I usually get my full 30 gallons out of it in flight. And when I get on the ground, I'll put 30 gallons in that tank. I don't know if that's normal or not normal, but out of my tip tanks, I usually get the full 15 out of those.
That's
normal.
Scott, you have a 64 or older, am I correct? What do you, I'm sorry, a 60 or older? What year is your plane?
5, but it's a carbureted model.
Did it come with auxes?
It has the inboard and the outboard auxes. It came with all 4 tanks, not the tip tanks.
Okay. Because I think my understanding, and Zach is the guy to ask about this, but my understanding is that the airplanes prior to having auxes, I think the 58 and 59s, they actually have a 30-gallon bladder. The ones after that actually have a 28-gallon bladder. And for certification purposes, rather than recertify the airplane as having 28-gallon tanks, they were able to do a little magic pencil work with the FAA and called it a 30-gallon tank with 2 gallons unusable. This is how it's been.
That is correct. In fact, we'll be redoing the POHs because the 2-tank Comanches have 30 gallons usable. So just to reinforce what Ray just said, since I just discussed this with Zach 5 days ago, there's a little error in the kilo POHs.
Well, if he's got a 65, he must have old bladders in it or something. If he's getting 30 gallons,
I don't know. You know,
when did you guys say the switchover was? It went a little digital on me, and I heard something about certain years had 30 and others had 28.
The airplanes that only came with 2 tanks, which is 58 and 59, those
and 60.
And 60, excuse me. Those airplanes, the bladders were originally 30 gallons.
Well, and the 180s stayed as 2-tank airplanes until 62 or more.
I thought they became anyway. At some point, they became an option for 4 tanks. When they went to 4 tanks, it changed a little bit. And Russ, you had a.
Yeah, but I have a 58 250, and it originally had those automotive gas caps that leak. And, you know, I used to have to look out each window to see how much gasoline I was losing right after takeoff. So I changed, and by the way, I used to get about 29.5 gallons in there, absolutely topped off. I changed to the newer style tank tops that have, actually they have an extra air intake also to keep the bladder slightly pressurized. And then they have the thermos bottle type stoppers. And I actually lost a couple of gallons of capacity because the aluminum on the tank top doesn't stick up quite as high, and I can't get that last little bit of air bubble out of there. So I figure I've got 28-gallon tanks, and I used to have 29.5 for what it's worth.
Well, and the other thing is the only way you can fill these mains full is if you're on a downhill. You need about 4 to 5 degrees downhill for the plane to be level for you to get all the fuel in it. So unless you're on the downhill,
there's no way to do that.
or you jack it up, you cannot get your tanks full on the ground.
Yep. So I figured 28 gallons, and if I were ever to put more than that in it, I'll let you know.
All right.
Used to get 29.
ATF agent, go ahead, and then Dutchman, I'll come back to you if you're still hanging in there patiently.
Yeah. So we were having a discussion in the iFly St. Louis group on winter flying, and I posted the Lycoming manual. And I can't remember if it was Lycoming manual or somebody else had said on the ground, you know, switch between all the tanks you plan on using in flight to make sure there's no water and you can get flow off of them. And I thought that was a good idea. For me, my average time, you know, I'm at a Delta airport. I'm at downtown St. Louis. And if I get an IFR clearance, you know, I'm probably 10 minutes from startup to the time I take off. So it gives me time to kind of switch between, you know, all those tanks. So just food for thought on the winter flying aspect.
It's valid. One caveat I'd warn you about if you haven't heard about this. Make sure that you're not switching to your takeoff tank right before you take off. Because our airplanes this happened to me. I had long story short, if you flip tanks right when you're crossing the line and you have a problem with that tank, you're going to find out at rotation. So you want to be on that, whatever tank you're going to take off on, you want to be on for a while before you actually take off.
Yeah. And so like for me, I've got, I can run off both mains simultaneously or both tip tanks simultaneously. So yeah, I get what you're laying down. And by the time I'm ready to go, the fuel pump's already been on for probably a good minute.
Yeah.
And I'm on my mains sitting there, just kind of hanging out, waiting for release. We have a slew there. So the Billikens are always in the traffic pattern, making us wait.
Did I hear you correct? You usually you're on your boost pump for a minute or two before you take off?
Probably about a minute. Yeah. I call them as ready.
Another side note on that, and I'm actually going to advise you not to do that. As I said earlier, when you're on the electric fuel pump, the fuel does not flow through the mechanical fuel pump. It bypasses it. On a hot day, if your engine's hot on the ground, you can vaporize the fuel in the mechanical fuel pump if you run it on the boost pump too long. And then if you had 1,000
done that.
What's that?
Been there, done that.
Yep. So have I. So you get to 1,000 feet, you reach over, you flip that boost pump off. All of a sudden, your mechanical pump's going to cavitate, and your engine's going to start spitting, and you're going to start, well, you're not going to be
spitting your pants.
So it's actually in the POH. Do not turn the do not bring the boost pump on till you're ready to cross the line and go.
Okay, yeah, and I run my
cavitation and altitude in the climb out. Just bring the boost pump back on, and now you got to kind of milk that boost pump. You'll turn it on, the engine will come back. You turn it off for a minute, watch your fuel pressure come down, turn it back on. I made the mistake one day, hot summer day. I forgot to turn it off till about 5,000 feet, and it took me a good 10 minutes to get the mechanical pump primed again. So just be aware of that. That is an issue if you leave the boost pump on too long on the ground on a hot day. Dutchman, are you still there? I kind of left you hanging for a while. Are you still with us? Okay. I guess not. Anybody else? Any other questions? Comments, concerns, moans, groans, gripes, complaints. Tell me I'm wrong.
No, I had a question. Just, I've got the Kellogg. This is Alan here. I got the Kellogg POH here for a 63 carbureted Comanche. And I just read off a couple of numbers here. So for a 90-gallon airplane, at 55%, you're good for 7.5 hours, 7.7 and 1,000 nautical miles. 65%, you're good for 6.3, 969 nautical miles. At 75%, you're good for 5.4 and about 850 miles. With a 60-gallon airplane, if you're cruising at 55%, you're good for 4.8 hours, about 684 miles. And 65%, you're good for 3.9 hours, 600 miles. And at 75%, With a 60-gallon bird, you're good for about 3.3 hours and 500 miles or so.
Just want to check. That's with a reserve, correct? That's.
I'd have to read this. Let's see. I believe that is correct.
Okay. Just wanted to clarify that because that's.
Yeah, it is. Cruising range includes a 45-minute fuel reserve plus allowance for fuel used during taxi, takeoff, climb, cruise, and at stated powers and descents. So I'm like you. After 5.5, I'm ready to, you know, and then of course 5.5, you're probably in the 75-gallon range of fuel consumption. So, you know, you've 75, 85, you got maybe 11 gallons left. You know, it's time to set it down.
Look, 2 hours, yeah, I'm ready to start my descent.
So I know, but
real,
and the only other thing I would comment is, again, I see this all the time, but you know, when I fill my tanks, I fill it to the brim, and that to me ensures me that I got a full 90 gallons, 86 gallons usable. And so many times it's funny, you know, if you let a line guy do it, he'll go, oh, you know, I'll leave a little room for expansion or something. I've had the guy leave 2 inches below the bottom of the spout. So, you know, most fuelers don't understand that. So I'm just saying, you know, when you're fueling a Comanche, I fuel that sucker to the gills. Anyway.
Quick comment. We got a feedback from Zach that kind of reiterates, if you have tip tank or, you know, I'm sorry, same from Zach, you have to sump for close to 30 seconds to get to the aux tank fuel. So that's to the aux tanks. The tip tanks, I'm going to run that sump for a really long time to make sure I'm getting to them.
So I pulled up the Piper power setting table, and they're saying at 10,000 feet, if you run 2,400 RPMs and 19.6 inches of manifold pressure, that is the only way to get 65% rated power. And that's going to give you 12.3 to 14 gallons an hour. Otherwise, you're running anywhere from 17.4 to 19.1 at 21 to 2,400 RPMs for 55% power, which is going to give you 10.3 to 12. And I normally run like 20 inches and 2,300 RPMs and lean out to 11 to 12 gallons an hour. And that's on my shade and fuel flow. And that's 100 rich a peak on my JPI. So,
and you know, one of those things, and for me especially, but until recently when I got the engine monitor, I didn't have CHTs, I didn't have EGTs. I had a carbureted engine that I was climbing to altitude. I was leaning till it stumbled and then richening it up. I had no idea what no clue what my fuel burn was on any given flight. And that's why, you know, in talking to the guys, you know, I was taught this procedure. And even though I have that equipment now, I still do this every time because these are, you know, instruments are great. They give us more info, but I like to have, you know,
how much do you trust them?
You know, if my fuel flow is telling me I'm doing 12 gallons an hour, and that's the time endurance I get off of 15 gallons, then everything's on the same page. You know, if I end up with a disconnect, okay, now there's a problem somewhere. I want to change a plan. I want to go with the most conservative numbers. All right. Anybody else?
Yeah. Can you see my hand? I can't see it on my picture, but I did click. It's Rich Bergman.
Yeah. Okay. I got you. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. After I got my my 260B, and I type approved in it and everything like that, and then for one reason or another, I decided to take a long trip. Well, I had experience with bladder tanks in Mach 1 jet aircraft off Alpha carriers and stuff. Not exactly the same as in a Comanche, thicker, heavier. But what happened was, as I was on my way back from where I was going into Riverside Airport. This is Southern California for you guys that don't know that, east of Los Angeles. anyway, and I started down, and I do my fuel management on a separate tablet on my left leg, so I know exactly where I am all the time, plus the shading, etc. But anyway, I started down. I have been in about a 50 knot headwind most of the way for about 50 miles. So I wasn't bingo, but I was in reserve. And from where I was, I could have pulled the motor back to an idle, and I had the runway made for about 15 miles. Okay, I'll admit it, not a good idea, but I had nowhere else to go. So anyway, on the way down, everything was good. And as I had never looked in the tank because the plane was being flown, I was on downwind. I made my turn to base, then to final at a bank, and the motor went puckada, puckada, and it was a right main. And I'm going like, I looked out and I kept my turn up, and I knew I had the runway made no matter what. I didn't know if I had the bathroom made, but I had the runway made. So anyway, I taxied, got down. I asked Brown if I could taxi directly to the fuel dump, and he said, Roger that. Anyway, so I looked in the tank. Whoever installed that bladder didn't put in all of the push downs into the connectors. There was areas in that thing that had puddles and everything else. And I didn't ever look at my log to see how long it had been or whoever did it. You don't start pulling bladder tanks out and reseating them because you just might as well buy another tank, okay? Well, I would never trust it. But when I did my bank to final, the fuel all moved in the wrong places of the puddle. And guess what? It didn't pick up. And so then I made my tank, I recalibrated everything, and I made my right main 28 gallons instead of 30. But boy, I'll tell you what a surprise if anybody's ever run into it. I do my own annuals because I'm capable of it. But boy, let me tell you something. I never checked that. Surprise, surprise. Going to mute.
I can tell you, that's part of that. I do not have the kit that allows me to get that terminate that 100-hour fuel bladder AD. And I've learned my lesson that I watch my IA do that inspection, because in all due respect to him, he's not a Comanche guy. He doesn't understand it the way I do. So, and after having experienced it, I'm somewhat vested.
Yeah, well, it's not only just a Comanche guy, it's understanding about how you seat bladder tanks and all of that before they finally form. I'll fly it like that. I don't have any leaks and everything like that. I just had to recalibrate the system and get a new pair of underpants.
Yeah.
On your tanks with the bubbles in the bottom of them, I have heard, and I don't remember where I read it or heard it, that you can get water between your bladder and the wing skin. Rain, for example, hopefully not condensation. So consider that you've the possibility you've got some foreign object under there. And secondly, I had an experience, I think 2 times, of a tank going dry when I should have still had half an hour or more of fuel in it. It was because the snaps had come out of the top and the top of the bladder was sagging down. And even though it was within the inspection period on that, so I rigged up a, with the suggestion of a mechanic from United Airlines, rigged up a method of knowing that those snaps will never again come out. And it consists of a little miniature hitch pin slid into the upper loop of the snap. You can just get your hand in there and put those little pins in so that the snaps never come out again. And that's a whole lot of safety.
Now that's a good idea if I would have been doing it myself, but somebody else did it. And I've had the plane for a long time. That happened pretty quick after I began flying it. And I just left it alone and everything is fine, but I would never try and pull up and reseat that tank because I guarantee you, you're gonna crack it somewhere. And it's, you know, over 15 years old, that tank is. So fly it like it is, but just remember, if I'm going to go base to final, I better have at least 5 gallons left in that main, of that right main. You betcha.
I'd want that anyway.
Yeah, me too. But after fighting that headwind all that time, it was so bad I'd turn the autopilot off and drive it myself with both feet on everything and both hands on the yoke. What a day. Anyway, so it goes.
Well, everybody, I'm
live and learn.
A little overwhelmed at the number of folks who dropped in for this. I don't have anything else. If anybody there are any more questions, happy to address them. But Pete, somehow you managed to get me to the point where I have nothing left to say.
Well, in that case, what I think I will do at this point is turn off the recording. This recording will be available tomorrow on the website as usual, and it's along with all the other ones. And it's been terrific. Ray, thank you very much. And with that, I'm going to end the recording.